1963, I stayed on in Washington, becoming assistant to John Gardner when he was Secretary of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, and eventually working for the White House, doing special projects for President Lyndon Johnson. In July 1964, President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act to eliminate the last vestiges of injustice in America. A great bundle of legislation followed. In 1965, I was asked to find out what impact all of his Great Society legislation would have on the country. A fascinating obligation, but it seemed impossible to find out what was going on at the time, let alone what the impact of the legislation on America's future would be. In spite of this compelling consideration, I could no longer bear Johnson's obsession about winning the war in Vietnam at any cost. I left the White House for an offer from IBM and became an assistant to Tom Watson, the chairman. In April 1967, Detroit erupted in race riots. That summer, Black Power advocates called for an armed revolution, and riots swept across the country. President Johnson rushed 4,700 paratroopers into Detroit, which had been nearly paralyzed by race riots. The turbulence was fueled the next year by the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Bobby Kennedy. America's cities were burning, and companies did not know what was going on and what they should do. This instability fed my hunt for a mechanism to monitor the transition the country was going through. How could I really see where America was headed? One day, I bought a copy of the Seattle Times at an out-of-town newspaper stand in Chicago. My eyes went over the different local headlines of newspapers that the kiosk sold from all parts of the country. I realized that by reading all those local newspapers every day, I could recognize new patterns of change in the country. I could really figure out what was going on in the United States. I had found the key, my epiphany. My entrepreneurial genes kicked in. I left IBM and Tom Watson, and with my last paycheck, started my own company, Urban Research Corporation. Before long, my growing staff and I were monitoring and cataloging 160 local daily newspapers. We focused on the notion that the sum of what was happening locally was what was happening in the country. It was a multitude of occurrences that I saw through my own experiences and my way of thinking at the time. The summary of what we learned and what we made of it was published in a weekly report, Urban Crisis Monitor. Soon, many companies became subscribers, and I began to give speeches about what I thought was going on in America. In the following decade, I kept working with major corporations and learned more about American society through our content analysis method. Out of the highly localized database, I watched the general outlines of a new society slowly emerging and got a sense of the direction in which America was restructuring. Although for me the changes were clearly underway, some of the new directions I saw seemed unlikely at the time. I risked displeasing the experts, who could have argued that describing the world in terms of shifting categories would be too simplistic. But I thought it was worth the risk. I felt that in a world where events and ideas were analyzed to the point of lifelessness, where complexity grew by quantum leaps, where the information din was so high that one had to shriek to be heard above it, people were hungry for structure. With a simple framework, we could begin to make sense of the world. And we could change the framework as the world itself changed. All of this finally resulted in my writing Megatrends. Megatrends sold 9 million copies. Reinventing the Corporation and several other books followed, including Megatrends 2000. Wherever I spoke in the world, journalists, politicians, and members of the corporate world began to ask, what will be the next megatrend? My audiences wanted to know where we will be in the year 2010 or 2030. And with an increasing insistence, they asked, how do you know? And how do you do what you do? It was an afternoon I spent with my friend Tony Offner when he would not stop digging into the question of how I did what I do. He wouldn't accept my answer that the information I collected, the many newspapers I read, the ideas and thoughts I exchanged with many people in different countries and cultures around the world, made me see where the world was heading. "Well then," he said, "if, as you say, the future is embedded in the present, and if I carefully watch what is going on in the world, I should get to the same results you do. But I don't. So what makes the difference?" As I thought about it, it became clear to me that the difference was not in what I learned, but in how I thought about it. "I guess, Tony," I heard myself saying, "it's my mindset." I had been aware that over the years I had developed certain rules to discipline my mind and filter information. I match and measure information against my own experience, using my values and mindsets. And so does everybody else. "What you say," Tony said, "sounds like rain falling on different ground." He was right. It's true that the mindsets are the ground on which the rain, information, falls. And the plants that sprout differ depending on the mindsets we have, and thus lead to different conclusions. It's how we receive information. That's the key. In this book, I focus on mindsets that are deliberately developed for a purpose. You can create mindsets that can instruct and organize you in your personal life and field of endeavor. Thus, this book provides not only the framework and the perspective of the first half of this century, but also the fundamental attitudes that are necessary to anticipate the future, to receive the future. Part 1. Mindsets. Mindset number 1. While many things change, most things remain constant. In a 24/7 media world, the hype is change. On August 8, 2006, Amazon.com listed 56,170 book titles under change, 11,195 titles under business change, and 2,404 titles under global change. An uncountable number of newspapers, magazines, and 24-hour news channels leave not one stone unturned, promoting the idea that everything is changing. Now, who in the world can keep up with this? No one can. Don't bother. Think about it. Most businesses stay in a steady state, day in and day out, year in and year out. Yes, products and markets have been altered, mostly for the better, and the tools we use have changed. But despite the avalanche of business books, business practices, the basics of buying and selling, of making a profit as a necessary condition of survival, have remained much the same during my 40 years of involvement. Whether cell phones can display television and calls are made via the internet, your bathtub filled by taking off your clothes, or your refrigerator opened by a rumble in your stomach, these are just other ways of doing what we do. Easier, faster, farther, more, and longer, and not the substance of our lives. We go to school, get married, and have kids and send them to school, which God knows does not change despite the chanting for school reform. Home, family, and work are the great constants. Most change is not in what we do, but how we do it. Within all the hype, the more we're able to differentiate between constants and change, the more effectively we'll be able to react to new markets and profit from change. Sports are a good example. The rules of team sports remain fairly constant. The changes we do make often come from a change in the way players play their game. A well-known big change was the popularization of the modern forward pass in football by Knute Rockne in the 1920s. The goal was still to get a touchdown, but how players could get to the goal line changed. Occasionally, an individual player's style will change a game. On the night of December 30th, 1936, a crowd of more than 17,500 turned out at the old Madison Square Garden in New York City to see Long Island University, the nation's #1 basketball team with a 43-game winning streak, oppose Stanford, the defending Pacific Coast Conference champion. Stanford ended LIU's winning streak with a 45-31 victory. But something more important happened. The crowd, in fact, had mostly come to see Hank Lucetti, Stanford's 6'2", 185-pound sophomore. He was the only player known for shooting the ball with one hand while he hung in the air, in defiance of basketball style. Everyone else